Okay, so here we are. It's Saturday, November the 7th, and it's time for Py-Lambda monthly invited speaker talk. And today we have joining Tony Rice. Tony is a DevSecOps architect at Cisco's Government Technology Services. He also, very interestingly, contributes to WRAL TV, which is a local TV channel in the Triangle area of North Carolina, for those who are not from this area. And so he contributes on astronomy and spaceflight topics. He's been programming in Python for 15 plus years. And my favorite fun fact about Tony is that he's a NASA ambassador. He does lots of cool stuff. So welcome, Tony. Thank you for joining us.
I appreciate the invite. So we're going to have some fun talking about some Python topics. We talked a little bit about the DevSecOps stuff, and we can talk about that more at the end. I've got plenty of time afterwards, too, if you want to extend a little bit. I don't have a problem with that. But I was going to focus on for WRAL, just because it's a lot more fun to talk about than some of that DevSecOps stuff. That, and since I work for government services, there's a lot of it that I can't talk about, which is just the way things go. So I wanted to throw this up here. That's my Twitter handle. I'm RTP Hokie in both places. And all the code I will chat about today and a whole bunch of other code is in my GitHub repo, which is all public. And that's in there as RTP Hokie as well. So let me share out this. I'm going to share a couple of things here. Let's share. We want that. I guess I have to share individually. So is that squished or does that look okay? It's hard to tell.
It's about the top left quarter half of your screen.
Yeah, I was going to say, it looks like there's only a quarter of the screen that's displaying. The rest of it's black.
I'm just going to share the screen. Good old Zoom. There we go. We'll do it this way.
Same problem.
Really?
Yep.
Stupid Zoom. Let's do this. That's squished too, so let me do it this way. I'll move this over here. Does that look a little better?
No.
Yeah. Same thing.
Same thing.
No, it's just gonna, well, let's try this. See if that aspect ratio is better.
I don't see a change except.
Nope.
Oh, there we go.
But it was the wrong aspect ratio, wasn't it?
It's not, your whole screen is not, it's only capturing like a fourth of your screen. So changing your display characteristics, I don't think are going to help.
Let's try this.
There we go.
There we go. That did it.
What was that?
That looks better. So I'm going to be rude and look off to my main monitor. I was hoping to do it on my laptop, but
How did you fix that?
I reshared it and held my mouth right, I guess. I don't know. Like I say, I'm not a Zoom aficionado, so this is all new to me. I usually use WebEx for obvious reasons. So this is my GitHub repo. Again, you can look at everything here that we're going to talk about today. But I wanted to share a couple of Python scripts that I've written specifically for WRAL, specifically for answering some questions there. And I understand there's several that are on the call that are new to Python or learning Python. And one of the questions I get from younger engineers at Cisco a lot is they're interested in learning Python or getting into it. And they ask, what's the best way to learn Python? Or anything else or any other coding language. And my answer is that it's easiest to learn these languages when you're not trying to learn these languages, when you're trying to answer a specific problem. So something that you're interested in, key off of that, and questions that come up out of that interest, learning it that way, I think, is the absolute best way. So I wanted to take you through a question that was asked of me about 6 weeks ago by one of the reporters there. They called me up and they said, well, Tony will know the answer to this question. Well, I didn't know the answer to the question, but I can figure it out. The question was, so we had a blue moon on October 31st, and the question was, this seems rare to me. When was the last time we had a blue moon on Halloween? And they were getting some different answers that were coming from the different wire services, AP, or some of the websites out there that focus on astronomy topics. Some were saying it hadn't happened since 1955, and others were saying, well, it happened back in 2000, and it was just very, very confusing. So the answer to the question was, well, let's go and model it. Let's go and figure out exactly when the moon turned full, and let's figure out when that happened on the 31st. The other bit of information that had to be shared with them was a blue moon on Halloween. The fact that it's blue isn't rare. If there's a full moon on Halloween, it's going to be blue, because the definition of a blue moon is the second full moon within a calendar month. It's total trivia. There's nothing scientific about it whatsoever. It's just a artifact of the length of days that it takes for the moon to go from a full phase to full phase. Doesn't line up with the calendar. Our calendar is just about arbitrary when you get right down to it. So, you set that blue thing aside, but, then what's the answer to blue? What's the answer to the Halloween blue moon? So this is the answer that I came out with, and I wanted to share the code with you to show how I came to that answer. Let me just move over to my PyCharm window so we can do it kind of live. How's the text size there? Is that readable for everybody?
Yeah, that's readable.
Yeah, it looks
Okay,
good
cool.
to me.
Yep.
Tommy.
Cool. All right, so I could drain it from top to bottom, but I'm actually going to start at the bottom. I tend to use a test-driven development methodology whenever I'm writing anything, whether it's code that I'm actually going to put out in their production at work, or it's something like this where I'm messing around at home or trying to do a little something on the side for the TV station or anybody else. So I write everything in a test case. I use unit tests. There's lots of other test harnesses out there. I use unit tests because I always have. It works well for me. I use PyCharm as my IDE. I've used other IDs as well. I've used the Microsoft one. I used Eclipse for quite a number of years before I switched over to PyCharm. They're all kind of similar. They all kind of do the same thing when you get right down to it. But for me, a good IDE is one that has this unit test functionality built into it, so that I can click on this nice little button right here that clicks on auto test. Every time I save the file I'm working on, it goes and reruns those tests. That works well for my my workflow. But we'll start here. So what I did was write a simple little function that takes a starting year and an ending year and the time zone that you want to look at it in, because that was ultimately the source of the confusion with the different stories that were coming out over the news wires. Some were assuming only the Eastern time zone, and the full moon occurs at an instant in time. You may look at your calendar and you see those little icons that are either full circle or an unfilled circle indicating the full or the new moon, and that may make. Go
Tony,
ahead.
are we supposed to be able to see code at this point?
Are you not seeing that screen?
I see we still see the README for blue moons and Halloween.
Let me look at what is showing up there. Why is okay? I love Zoom. Isn't Zoom great?
It's
Let's
an
reshare.
application for our times.
Entire screen here. How about now? Let me
Now
pause
there's a
the share.
series of overlapping windows.
Yep.
I
How about
see.
now?
I see code now.
Okay. Yeah. Now you see what I'm yammering on about my
And that
my pie
text
chart
size
window.
might be a little bit small for people.
Yeah, the
Okay.
text size on this needs to zoom in a little bit.
Let's do this.
Big text.
Better?
Just a little bit more, like half again as much. Excellent.
All right.
That's good.
We'll go with that. So again, here's all the unit tests. Break them out into separate ones. The unit test results show up down here. I kind of develop in here, and as I finish a function, I'll move it up into the other list. So here's the blue moons. Let's jump up to that definition. Start year, the in year of the measurement I want to do. I am reusing the same function to either find all the blue moons or only blue moons that occur in October. Past that time zone again, because this is an instantaneous thing, and whether a blue moon occurs on a given date or not depends on what time zone you're talking about. And that'll become a little clearer when I show you the table in a minute. But here's what's going on here. So I'll just kind of drain this a little bit to give you an idea of how all this works. First of all, let me scroll up and show you the imports. Could I go and write the math and all the integrations that are required to figure out when the moon turns a certain phase? Yeah, given a couple of months, I could probably do it, but why do it? I'm using a package called Skyfield, and it's put out by a gentleman called Damian Rhodes. He put out a package earlier called Ephem, as an ephemeris that did some similar things. Just a fantastic Python package that does all of this astronomical calculations for you. Time zones are a thorn in your side if you ever had to deal with date time information. So I'm pulling in PyTZ to do time zone math. And some of these other ones you'll be familiar with. Date time, obviously. NumPy, we could do hours and hours on NumPy. You'll see that pop up from time to time. Simple cache, I'll just point out, is something that's really, really nice when you're using test-driven development. You simply import it. You put a decorator on top of the function, specify a file name for where that cache goes, a time to live in seconds, and every time you pass the same set of parameters, this decorator will catch that and just spit back its cache. So where that becomes very nice in test-driven development is when you're running these things over and over and over again. This is a pretty expensive function when you're running it over a couple of centuries. It will take several seconds to run. So it's nice to have a cache spit that back. But I'll go ahead and start.
I just want to make one point here. So in Python 3.9, the time zone package is actually built into the standard library. So we have the new
cool
new time zone package.
Yeah, I switched a couple of things to Python 3.9 and immediately switched back because so many of the packages that I'm used to are not bytecode compiled yet, which is just a pain in the butt for me.
Yeah, it's probably going to take until like sometime after the first of the year for all of that to catch up.
I'm all about 3.7, and honestly, 3.9, first of the year on the typical packages, I want to say it was Pandas that wasn't compiled yet. And I was having some compilation problems and just didn't want to spend the time digging into it. But yeah, it's a good point about 3.9. A lot of stuff has moved into the standard package. So there's the parameters. I'll drain this find phases in a second. But a couple of things to point out here. When you're iterating over toList, zip is a real great way of doing that two-dimensional toList of the same size. It's really a one-dimensional iteration over toList. So that's what's going on here. Actually, let me jump into find phases real quick. So find phases is where some magic happens through the Skyfield Skyfield package. I create a date time for the start year and the end year and localize that so that I'm working just in the Eastern time zone. Skyfield assumes everything is UTC. So this helps get around that. And then I'm using a function called almanac and find discrete. Find discrete is looking for the highs and lows in a curve going up and down. So the top would be a full moon of that curve. Think of a sine wave. And the bottom would be that new moon. And it finds the dates along that x-axis where those things happen and then kicks them back to you. Date and time arithmetic is just absolutely fascinating to me, especially in Python. Skyfield has some really cool ways of handling it. Up in here, you'll see this TS, time series or time scale. That is used within Skyfield to look over periods of time for things happening, distances between planets, stuff like that. But the really cool thing about it is that time scale it's like range, if you're familiar with that as a tool within Python, but you can set it at different granularities. So you can have a time scale that runs between years at the year granularity, or you can have it at month, day, hour, down to millisecond. That's how it works. Just kind of a neat way of doing it. So again, draining this. So we're looping through the Y and T here are that phase that the find discrete has found, whether it's a new moon, full moon, quarter, so on and so forth. And the T is that time scale. So this follows through. The 2 is a magic number, unfortunately, that is kicked back by that phase. That means a full moon. So we only look at full moons that are kicked back there. Take that that time scale that was given back, convert it back into our time zone so we can output it in something that makes sense. This is a simple definition of a full moon. If the last full moon was in this calendar month, then the current full moon we're looking at is blue. And this goes through and looks for deltas between, time passed between the last full moon, so we can output it in some other places. Basically, this is all the logic that looks for the full moon, builds up a table. I even put it out as a mean for some reason. What was the average time between blue moons? Didn't really use that. That does all the nasty calculation. If we look at how we actually put this out, this is that GitHub repo. I wanted it output in a way that would be usable to people so they can go and look it up. So I'm using Markdown here, Markdown language, to create this table. These are all the Halloween full moons between 1900 and 2100, and it's broken down by time zone. And you'll see that loop in a second. Going back to the code, this is that Markdown table. I'm looping through whatever time zone list I send in, and I'll show you that in a moment, and then run that function that I just showed you that calculates those blue moons, builds up another table, another dictionary actually, that we then build out this Markdown text, and it outputs the actual Markdown text. So if I run this down here, so here, let's do the October full moons. Here's my list of time zones. Those are the columns in that list. It's the variant where I'm only looking at Halloween, and I'll run it. And you'll see how long it takes. No time at all because of that cache. But this is the output then in Markdown language. So I could have just written that. I could have taken my data that was output of this and just wrote my Markdown, but this kind of format can be tricky and it's easy to screw up. So hey, automate that too. And the end result is this. And this answered their question. So here's 2020. The rest of the country was talking about, hey, we had a blue moon on Halloween back in 2001. But we didn't here in the East Coast. So that was the discrepancy. That was what was causing the confusion. So taking it back to my original comment about learning Python, this was a very specific question that somebody was asking. We're able to write some code it's a little complex, the code is, but it's because of the subject matter, and output a very clear answer to the question. So I'll pause for a minute, see if there's any questions about the code or about the approach.
So in the chat, Tony, there, Mike, our attendee who doesn't have a working microphone, posted an article to USA
I see it.
Today.
Yeah. So USA Today, this is a good example of when you're taking in particularly science news, particularly astronomy news, from a national source, they are going to provide that information for their entire reader base, for an entire consumer base. So their claim was that the last full moon, blue moon on Halloween, was in 1944. Well, they're right, but they're just using a different yardstick. So if you look right here, here's 1944. The yardstick they were using was the last full moon that occurred on Halloween in all U.S. time zones. It just so happens that Alaska and Hawaii fall into line here. But as you can see down here on the blue moons, sometimes it happens in Hawaii, but not Alaska. So it's just a different yardstick. The East Coast media would focus on the Eastern time zone. So USA Today was looking at all U.S. time zones.
So can you explain more about how you get from the command line or the terminal display of your output to this README? Are you writing that to a file and then copying it here, or how does it get from there to here?
I absolutely could. This header information here, if we go and edit this file, you'll see that there's a little bit more markdown in here. This header information here, the labels on each one of these tables, those could all be written to a file that would, called readme.md. And then when checked into GitHub, by default, that README is going to show up when you go into the repo. Absolutely could do this. In this particular case, I cut and paste this chunk of markdown because one of the nice things about PyCharm is it has a WYSIWYG, close as you can get to a WYSIWYG editor for markdown.
Nice.
So as I go in here and make whatever changes I want, it gets reflected over there. And I've just kind of gotten lazy doing that. But to your point, yes, you could absolutely fully automate it so your markdown files are created and checked into the repo. And that's a really good habit to get into for things like build manifest. As you are making releases on code, any bugs that are fixed, you can automate sending those to a markdown file that are then checked in with the repo. You don't have to forget to do it. And it's always in the same format. So I'm going to press forward unless there's any other questions. I wanted to show you at least one other one that was, again, a question that came up as a result of something that was shared on WRAL.com. So I'm a big sci-fi fan, as anybody who has an interest in space and astronomy is. And the question was asked, how well did the movie The Martian that came out several years ago with Matt Damon getting stuck on Mars, how good was the science? How close did they get to fact there? And the answer is pretty good. It's one of the more accurate science movies out there. The one big problem being at the beginning of the film, there's a giant dust storm, which is what strands Mark Watney, the main character on there, strands him on Mars. That's physically impossible. The atmosphere of Mars is far too thin to generate a storm like that. Certainly something dangerous enough to pick up debris and cause injury. But the other question was, the timings, the plausibility of getting somebody there. How accurate is that? The gentleman that wrote the book that this was based on actually did all the math before he wrote the book. So his orbits are plausible, his timings are plausible. He calculated all of the the distances between Mars and Earth and how long it would take signals to get back and forth. He did that all. My understanding is he did a lot of it in Python, and he did a lot of it using that FEM module that I was referring to. So I used that module and did some checking of this. I have been told, I don't know that it is true, but it makes me happy to hear that I'm the first AP writer to ever back up my stories with Python code or with a GitHub repo. So you'll see that I link directly to my code in these stories. The question was, when might this Martian movie have taken place? And I found that 2020, 2032, and 2035 as the times that were plausible for this to happen. So let me jump into the code. And you can see there's not a whole lot here. Unlike you would think that something as simple as full moons would be super easy to calculate, and something as complex as Mars orbits would be a lot more complex. But here it all is.
Forgive me, Tony, for interrupting, but your text here is microscopic almost. It's really super tiny. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you for the reminder. So this I will go ahead and drain. I'm importing a couple of libraries, one called Holidays, because Thanksgiving is one of those that varies. So I'm going to let it do the work for me, the actual date of Thanksgiving. So I'm going to let it do the work for me. There's a FEM that pulls in those ephemeris from JPL. And what an ephemeris is a way of mathematically describing where all the planets are in a given time frame in relationship to each other. Date time we're all familiar with. These are some constants. A sol is the length of a day on Mars. It is slightly longer. It's about 45 minutes longer than an Earth day. That comes into calculation in a few minutes. C is the speed of light in meters. AU is an astronomical unit, and that is the average distance between the Earth and the Sun. We use that in some output. And this is some information from the book that describes when a specific event in the book happens. Thanksgiving occurs on Sol 15, and NASA and other agencies begin numbering a mission day on Mars. Typically, Sol 0 is landing day. So this would have happened on the 15th Martian day after landing. So that's all the constants. This is back when I had the bad habit of making absolutely everything object-oriented, and there's really no good reason for it here, but here it is. I've got an object called the Martian. I'm never going to create more than one object, but there it is. But that does allow me to test this with different years. So I take in an argument of a year. I figure out what the date of Thanksgiving is for that year. I figure out arrival and launch days to be able to compare those back to some parameters in the book. And I'm also going to figure out things like the Earth distance, the Earth to Mars distance, specifically to find out how long signals take to get back and forth between Mars and Earth, again, because that was mentioned in the book. So down here, this is back when I was using string formatting. I use f-strings now, if anybody's familiar with that, in Python 3. I wrote this back when I was using Python 2.7. But anyway, that's what's going on there. I'm looking over a range from 2014, when the book was written, up to 2050, just as an arbitrarily high date, to see which of those dates which of those launch opportunities would be available, or actually when the launch opportunities were, and then compare that back to the book to see if it makes sense or not. So I figure out the launch opportunity. This gives me a launch date. I figure out, well, actually it gives me a date of when Thanksgiving fell there, and figure out the delay in minutes based on the Earth to Mars distance. And if it is between 11 and 12 minutes, which is what they tell us in the book, hey, that's a possible time that this could occur. And the reason Thanksgiving, if you've not seen the movie before, the reason Thanksgiving is important here is because one of the things in the book and in the movie that is important to Mark Watney being able to survive on Mars for as long as he was, is he has potatoes in his food supply. They were a surprise. It was sent to the crew. fresh potatoes to be used during their Thanksgiving dinner. So he would have had to been there during Thanksgiving. So that's where you get this this list of 2020, 2032, and 2035 as the possible dates. And 2022 is or 2020 is too soon. Obviously, we have no ability to go to Mars in 2020. Looking at the science a little bit more, 2032 isn't possible because it's not it doesn't have the right orbital parameters. Mars is not in the right place quite. It's not the proper launch opportunity to get there in 2032. So 2035 is when it occurs. And in the book, Weir doesn't come out and say it in the book, but he later came back and said, yeah, a launch date of July 7th, 2035 is when this can occur. So I just wanted to share that as kind of a fun way to answer a mundane, kind of geeky question using a little bit of Python code. And as you can see, it's not a whole lot of code. So any questions on this?
May not be a whole lot of code, but it looks like a whole lot of fun.
Oh, it absolutely was.
Those are cool questions. I mean, you know, it never occurred to me to think of like nailing down, you know, the when it could occur based on like the data that they give you in the movie. I just really enjoyed the movie.
Yeah, it's a pretty good movie. So I see there's some questions in the chat. Let me address a couple of those. I'll go backwards. Did you take into account technology changes expected, liquid hydrogen, hydrogen metal access for launch with rates and access to ion drives? Really, no. I do a lot of work with NASA and actually do speak at conferences, and I speak in schools and in the local science museums here, and I'm help out with the Speakers Bureau at the NASA Langley Research Center up in Hampton, Virginia. So I'm pretty familiar with a number of those technologies. The thing about those technologies is they take quite a while to develop and to bring into a practical use. I mean, even 2035 is pushing something like that. We do use ion drives now. There is a JPL mission that's using an ion drive, and I want to say it's the one that went to the asteroid Vesta. I can't remember the name of the mission off the top of my head. So they are in development. Did not use that as a metric here. There are a lot of things that we have to fix before, or problems that we have to figure out before we can get to Mars, especially with boots on the ground. If you're into Mars at all and you read a lot of the information and speculation, you'll see 2035 come up a lot. 2020 and 2035 are interesting when you look at the math around where Mars is and where Earth is. It's still available tonight. So if you go out tonight and you look up in the sky, you see a bright orange dot, that's Mars. And it's really, really bright and really easy to see still. And it's been that way for the past 2 months. The Mars orbit has a high eccentricity. Earth orbit's a little bit lower. And eccentricity is the measurement of the circularity of the orbit. Mars orbit is a little more elongated than Earth is. Earth is, for all intents and purposes, almost circular. With that high eccentricity, some years they're going to, as Mars and Earth pass each other, like race cars on a track or runners on a track, some years they're going to be closer than others because of that lack of circularity of the orbit. In 2020 and in 2035, that pass, as Earth overtakes and passes Mars on that inner lane, if you will, of the orbit, they happen to happen at points where those orbits are closer together. Again, 2020 and 2035. 2035, Mars and Earth are going to be even closer. So the mission planners really have that one marked on their calendar. If we send people to Mars, that's going to be the year to do it, because it's going to take the least amount of fuel, and every ounce of fuel that you don't stick on board a spacecraft is you can put people on there or food or equipment or whatever. So you want that optimal time to go. So let me look at what other questions are in here. Yes, you're absolutely right. It was Dawn was the name of the mission. Thank you for that. Somebody uses Black Duck in evaluation of Python libraries. That's a system that I've used before. There's dozens of them out there. Question, Let me read this question real quick. How do you evaluate libraries? Do you look at their code? Do you interact with the OS community? Do you use a rating from sources? That's a really good question. When you go and you're pulling in unknown libraries into your code, you're basically accepting whatever code that they've stuck in there and adding it onto your code. So the answer is, in practical terms, we use a set of known libraries that have already been vetted. And we also don't draw the files themselves directly from PyPy. We don't pull them off the internet. We have copies of them locally. They've already been vetted and just use those over and over again. So if there's an additional library that we need to pull in, I usually look at the code. I'll look through the code and see if it looks, I see anything that's unusual there. That can't be 100% though. You're never going to be able to find 100% of the problems that are in there. So the other answer is we put other compensating controls out there. We prevent it from phoning home. You know, if there's a vulnerability in there that might be sending data that we didn't intend to outside, we just make it so that can't happen. We lock these things down in containers or in firewalled servers so that they can't get out. Let me look back at other questions. Okay, here's another one. So there's a question about object-oriented programming. And I'm kind of ribbing myself a little bit there for writing something as an object-oriented approach that, you know, really didn't need it. There's nothing inherently wrong about it, I suppose. But sometimes it's a little more complex than it needs to be. You should always write something as simply as you can. We have a bad habit as coders to try and optimize things sometimes to add in functionality for later use that we haven't actually have a need for right now. That's all I was really referring to. Yeah, functional is best. I 100% agree. So anybody else want to open their mic and ask a question?
I'm the one who asked the OOP question.
Okay.
If you were to rewrite that script, how would you do it? Just more of a functional?
Simple loop.
Oh, okay.
Just a simple loop. Instead of instantiating the object and passing in year there, I just put it in a single loop.
All right, that's fair. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Well, we'll continue answering some of these questions here. I wanted to share one other piece of code with you that kind of talks back to this theme of having some technical questions that come up on WRAL and how we were able to answer those questions with Python. This isn't so much a question as it is a visualization. It's looking at the census a couple of weeks before it was due and trying to call out where in the state that people were being very good about returning the census and where there were some challenges. So this is a Python package called matplotlib and an extension to it called basemap. Now there's a lot of ways that you can create maps with Python. I like this one because it's pretty flexible and it is really good about using Esri shapefiles, which it's a data format that describes the shapes of everything you see here, but you can also stick a database right in that shapefile as well. So here my Esri shapefile was, of course, describing the shapes of the counties and the shapes of North Carolina, but we were able to stick in response rates on the census. With matplotlib and basemap, you can create these color bars down at the bottom that color code how things are going up here. All these callouts, I probably could have done that in Python, but it was just more trouble than it was worth. So I brought in the graphics that were created by matplotlib and then wrote over them in Photoshop just so it would look pretty. But using the same data set, we were able to generate this graphic right here that is the state of North Carolina. But the audience for WRAL is the DMA or the media area for Raleigh, which is all of these counties here. And I went ahead and created a zoomed in version of that shows the individual areas within those counties that are tracked by the US Census. So this is all coming off of data that comes directly out of the census. And I'll show you the code in a second. It's live. Every time it changes, or every time we run this, it pulls a fresh copy of the data down because it was being updated at least daily by the Census Bureau, and sometimes more than that. But this helps us understand, where the really good response rates are coming from and where those aren't. And something interesting happened here too as I started looking through the data. See if it shows up a little better here. I can zoom in. Yeah, the resolution's not great on the website, but you see these two white holes here. I didn't get any data for those areas, and I finally figured out why after asking a bunch of questions. This is RDU Airport in Umstead Park, where nobody lives. This is RTP, where there are nothing but companies and nobody lives. And this is the area in Hope County where Fort Bragg does their paratrooper training. So these are giant drop zones that are just big open patches of field, and nobody lives there. So no census data from there. Jump in and share the code real quick, just so you can kind of get a feeling for what this code looks like. Clicked on something wrong there. Okay. So those are just comments showing where I got the data from. This is really, really sloppy code. So I'll show you how it looks when it's bad. This is code that creates the actual map itself. PLT, you'll see a lot in matplotlib code. This is the ultimate plot that gets output. I specify 16 by 9, and that's the TV size. 300 dots per inch. The face color and edge color, that gives us a white background and no border. And then I can use different projections, different map projections to give different shapes. I always use mill with TV because it's what people are most used to seeing. Matplotlib will draw on, or basemap specifically will draw on counties for you, which is kind of nice. Here's where we get the data. This is accessing one of those shape files, again from the Census Bureau, that describes those tracks that we're showing down at the county level, the individual shapes within the counties, and it matches it up with the data that's coming down from there. Is this the one that I could show you? Here's where we're pulling information out of those shape files. The county name. This is the county response rate. That's matching up with the tracks. I was looking at this earlier. I spotted a naughty that I wanted to show you. There it is. So one of the first things we talked about was don't put secrets in your code. Here I've done exactly that. I put my my database key in this code here, so anybody could go and use it. Actually, I've changed it since then, so you can't actually use it. But this is the database key to go and pull out of this this API, and this is how the data is pulled live off of the census website. So that's just kind of wanted to give you another view into some other ways that we use Python at the TV station to create stuff like this. So we did this for the census back a couple of weeks or months. I've totally lost track of time. On Monday, we did some analysis of the ballots that were being returned absentee to try to answer the question, and again, going back to what I originally was saying with the TV station, it all comes out of questions. We can write Python code to answer specific questions. The specific question was being asked on Monday and over the weekend was absentee ballots that were rejected for some reason in North Carolina. What happened to them? Were those resolved? Were those problems resolved? How were they resolved? I've got another article on there. I worked with one of the data scientists at WRAL to create this article. But the long and the short of it is about 2/3 of the folks that had an absentee ballot that was rejected for some reason during this election They just decided to go to the early voting polls, and they solved it that way. As of Monday morning, of the 15,000 some voters that had voted early through absentee that had their ballots rejected for some reason, signature problems, address problems, they were sent there without being in a sealed envelope. There's a couple different reasons. There's only 611 people statewide that had not solved that problem already. So that was pretty cool. It gave us a little bit of confidence, but it was nice to be able to have a ton of data coming from the North Carolina Board of Elections that we could dig into and on a per voter basis see exactly what was going on. It was all done in Python, and it's all up on the repo. I'll bring that up while we answer some questions. RTP Hokey, repos, and see early voting. So this was thrown out there very, very quickly just so I had it available to everybody. And this is using a SQLite database as a quick and dirty way to do a lot of filtering. But you're welcome to look over all that as well. Some more questions. Have you still got me? Have we dropped the connection?
No, we're still here.
Okay.
There's some questions in the chat.
All right, I see them now. Vetting of libraries is a task for your team, or there another team? At Cisco, we have a dedicated security team that's going to help out with things like that. But I also have an expectation that anybody that's going to be bringing a new library in is going to do some of that vetting themselves. But ultimately, our security team is responsible for that. So another question was, how do you get involved with working with RAL to produce apps and articles? I was asked to be a guest on the morning show about 10 or 11 years ago to discuss a trip I was taking down to the Kennedy Space Center. I was invited to be a guest of a launch down there, and it was a launch of a mission called Juno that is currently orbiting Jupiter, gathering lots of good information about that. And that's honestly how the relationship started. I'd known the weather team there for quite some time, and I actually send out a weekly email to not just the weather team at WRAL, but the weather team at all the stations in Raleigh, and at least one station, usually more than one station, on all the media markets in North Carolina. And actually nationwide, there's about 350 meteorologists that I'm in contact with at least once a week. And it's sharing information like this. It's sharing information about the blue moons. It's sharing information about meteor showers, launches, things like that. And the reason I do that, and I've been doing that for so long, is I feel very strongly that science has kind of taken a backseat in the last couple of years in our country. And the one scientist that people see on a regular basis, no matter where they are, and maybe the only scientist anybody sees on a given day, is the TV meteorologist. They, as a profession, have a concept that they really push at the professional meetings and things like that about station scientists. They're the person who has to deal with a lot of the science questions. They're asked to put on a hat to be a geologist or a seismologist when there's an earthquake. I know all of my meteorologist friends in North Carolina and Virginia, they all had to figure out what the seismology of that earthquake that happened up in northwestern part of the state a couple of months ago. They have to be the astronomer when interesting things are coming up astronomy-wise. So I'm just trying to help them out there. And about 8 years ago was when Ariel asked me to start writing a weekly column for him. And I actually write on a number of different topics now. I always post at least something once per week. And if there's something interesting going on, like a meteor shower or a close conjunction where there's a couple of planets that are very close to each other in the sky, makes it really easy to see, I'll post an additional article that way. So let me see.
That's fantastic. I mean, the way that that's amazing.
Yeah, it's lots of fun. It's lots of fun. They're absolutely great there, and it has made me a better developer, I think, because There's deadlines here. I have to make stuff succinct. I have to keep myself from writing more than I actually need to solve the particular question. And I write a little bit cleaner code because I try to publish whatever code I create for a given story every single time. I know that somebody's going to be looking at it, so that makes me it's somebody in the general public who may not understand the code as well. And there's also people that are learning. So it makes me be a little more careful when I'm writing my code, I think. If you're using SQLite, does that mean that you did the analysis of early voter data run on your local machine? Yes, I did. The data set that comes down from the Board of Elections is in CSV format. And the particular data set I was working with was analyzing early voting. They lump it all under absentee, which includes those that voted in person at early sites and those that sent in absentee ballots. And there is one row for absolutely every physical ballot that was out there, because these all tie to physical ballots. Some people, I think the number was like 99% of people, they filled out one ballot and they were done. That remaining 1%, it took them more than one ballot to do it. There was something wrong with the original one. There's a clerical error. There was, again, signature errors or whatever. So there was one for each one of those. There's one row for each one of those in the CSV file. Brought those in and reduced that data down so that it was, and this is what got stuck in the SQLite database. There was one row in that table for each voter. And then we expanded out if there was multiple votes, how that worked. So SQLite was really useful in doing that. It was also useful in helping answer the question of, so that got us from 455,000 rows. That got us down quite a bit. And then I created a view that looked just at the voters that had problems, because that was the question we were ultimately trying to answer. And that was down to 15,000 rows. That was all on the local machine. Indexes are a wonderful thing in databases. They took the processing from, even on my high-end MacBook, from 7 hours down to about 30 seconds, simply by indexing the data properly. But once we have that view in place, we were able to filter out and answer the question of the people that had problems, how many of them problems with absentee ballots that they had mailed in, how many of them solved that problem by mailing another ballot in, and how many of them solved that problem by simply going and early voting, and how many hadn't solved the problem at all. So data science is all about cleaning your data and reducing it down to something useful.
So was that something that was available through open data, or did you have to have special access to get the data?
No special access required whatsoever. For those of us on the call that live in North Carolina, we live in one of the most transparent states based on the other data sets I've seen from other states. Absolutely transparent states when it comes to making that data available. 100% available to anybody that just wanted to go download it and was brave enough to go and dig through it. And again, every single paper ballot was accounted for. And I'll tell you another quick story there. As I was digging through the data and trying to understand exactly what we were seeing there, I noticed that one voter, and it's actually two voters, but voters in Forsyth County, one had 59 paper ballots, and 58 of them were canceled, which means that they were marked as not usable clerically by the Board of Elections, as opposed to just thrown away or whatever. They were marked canceled. And the last vote that they cast was marked accepted. And there was another voter in that same county who the number was like 37 or something like that. So I picked up the phone and I called the Forsyth Board of Election. I wanted to see what this anomaly was, why there was this outlier. Not that I had any suspicions or anything like that. I just wanted to understand this data. I got a call back a couple hours later from the Board of Election that said, oh, that's so-and-so and so-and-so. They work for the Board of Elections. That was them testing the early voting sites running a ballot through assigned to them to ensure that the equipment was working properly. And then they went and canceled that. They did that so many times. Then they actually submitted their own personal ballot. The Board of Elections there was happy that somebody had noticed this and was very eager to set the record straight, and happy that nobody was thinking they were up to something. But I think that goes to show how open our state Board of Elections is.
It also goes to show, like, if you're going to be using data, how really important it is to look at the data.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I mean,
You look
a lot
at
of time,
outliers.
yeah.
Outliers sometimes are just data outliers. More often than not, they're problems in your code. In this particular case, we could figure out what the data outlier was. Let me see if there's more questions. Yeah, I see people are putting up the URLs. Thank you for that. Yeah, this is really gross code. I put this together in just a couple of hours, but it solves the problem. Now, here's a good example of using Python to test itself and to look for problems in the data. So here I had put together a variable called story that told me whether or not a particular ballot had, if there was a problem with it, that problem had been solved same day, that on the same day. That probably meant that it was at an early voting site and they just mismarked their ballot and they got a new fresh one and the other one was marked canceled. Or how it was actually curing is how you fix a ballot. And I set that to default of unknown here. So I have these states that I think should handle everything within that data set. But if it is still unknown, that means that I've not handled all of the states, and I go ahead and raise it as an exception. This helped me build this up.
You know what, Tony? I would pay money to watch a live stream of you refactoring that code.
Oh God, no, you wouldn't. It's
Yes,
ugly.
I would. Yes, I would.
Oh, it's ugly.
Okay, does anybody else have any more questions for Tony? Let's see, looks like Mike.
Voted early in person and later a week more checked the status site, which did not show for me that I had voted yet. As I understand it, again, I'm not an expert in this. I'm just basing it off of what I've seen with this project. The voting status will be updated post official counting being done, which North Carolina is very much not done with their counting. The one thing that was the status that has definitely been updated throughout the process has been in absentee, meaning those that were mailed in. You can see if those were accepted or not. This same data set, though, does have early voting acceptance in it. So at the very top of this page, you'll see, let me share it out again. Blink. So this is the URL that actually goes to that. And absentee 2020-1103, that's the identifier for that election. You can see it's 230 megabytes zipped. It expands out to a lot more than that. And here's the county by county version. But you will find your ballot in there. You can load that into Excel if you're so inclined and search on your name. And I'd search on your county as well, because there's probably somebody with a similar name. There's 4 Tony Rices, I think, in the state. I learned playing through this. But you can find your ballot in there and you will see that it was accepted. But that if you go in through the level of the voter themselves, you won't see that you voted in this election until this election is not over yet. Once they certify at the state level the election, then they update that database and they make it sure. That's my understanding. Paste this link, data link. So here, let's put this in here. Link. And another good one is, where is it?
Do you know if they have a site or database for every state that you can access, or you just know about North Carolina because you live there?
I know about North Carolina because I was reducing that data. The two news websites that I've seen that do a marvelous job of breaking that down by state are the New York Times and the LA Times. And I was playing with some of that LA Times data this morning because I was going to redraw districts just for what would it look like if our electoral college looked a little bit differently. And the LA Times had a nice JSON file that I was able to pull down that's county by county. And even then, they threw up their hands when it came to Alaska. Alaska's one county to them, which I found kind of interesting. But there is not, to my knowledge, a central site that has all of that data for all of the states. So this is the North Carolina Board of Elections. They have a data tab just for data. They break down polling places. Here's that absentee data that I was working with. There's some high level information here in PDF form. That's great if you just want a general overview of what's going on, the numbers. If you really want to dig into this data, though, that's when you go down here to the daily stats and that full absentee file that I was talking about. Here's the count file, but they offer this in so many different formats. I'm planning, after all of this is over with, to go back and pull this data. This data goes back to, I think, 2008 is the last full set of data that's available here. I'm planning on going back and pulling 2016's data and 2020's data again and see what the shift looked like in people who voted on election day, on in-person early, and absentee. See how many people moved to voting absentee. I suspect it's significant. We'll probably break that down by on a partisan basis as well.
Are you going to put that in your repo, the one that you shared with us?
Sure. Yeah, probably. And then it'll be on WRAL whenever we get around to writing it. We'll probably wait a week or two after the election's over.
Yeah, just thought the repo would be an easier location for people who don't live in our area.
True. Well, it'll end up on the repo, I'm sure. Whether I end up writing an article on it or not, I'll probably actually write the code just out of my own curiosity. See if there's any more questions. Yeah. You have a specific style guide you follow. PEP 8. Is there another one? PEP 8 you can integrate into your IDEs as well, so it will nag you when you do things like don't put spaces in the right places, or all the different. Let me bring up PEP 8. That is the style guide. So indentation. I won't get into the tabs or spaces argument because we'll be here till the end of time arguing about that. I'll tell you one that I ignore is maximum line length, because we're not on VT100 terminals anymore. You might have noticed when I had my my PyCharm up that I had a lot of lines that were extended beyond that little yellow dotted line off on the right-hand side, which is that PEP 8 suggestion, don't make your lines beyond here. I'm sure there are plenty of people that are operating on laptops and have skinny screens, but I just don't worry about that so much anymore. That's the one that I ignore. The rest of them I try to adhere to. Any other questions?
In the database that you ended up using, or the data set, what I kind of came in a little bit late, so I missed like the first minutes. But did you actually have access to who they voted for?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I will show you the data. Let me bring it up here real quick.
So it just tells you if they were registered and whether or not they voted, right?
I was specifically looking at the, go ahead and share. Specifically looking at how things fell out with early voting, and it was on a per ballot basis. So I will bring that up. PyCharm will show databases, but it kind of stinks. So let me show you this instead so you can see what fields are in there. While this is coming up, somebody commented on TQDM. I love that module because it'll take any iterator and it gives you a progress bar as you iterate through things. It'll show you how many % done you are in that loop and give you an estimate on how long it's going to take to finish that loop. So let me make this bigger. And actually, I think I can make these in a browser. Rails data. Okay, so that helps. We don't care about 2008. We care about 2020. Here is the raw data coming out of that database. You have a county. You have a voter registration number. Everybody go and look at their voter registration card when you're done here. You will see this number here. NCID is an internal ID, from what I understand, that the Board of Elections uses to make it easier in some of these processings. Both of these columns are unique. Last name, first name, middle name. If you indicated any of the demographic information when you registered, it shows up here: race and ethnicity, gender, and age. That was another interesting thing. Was one of the fields you see all the way over on the right is if this ballot was cast with same-day registration. We in North Carolina are able, throughout early voting, as well as I think you can do it on election day. Don't quote me on that, but you can register and vote on the same day. When you compare all of that data, and actually let's do that, scroll over here.
As an election official in North Carolina, I can tell you that we no longer, you used to be able to same day register on election day, but that's changed, and you can
it's just early voting then.
You can only do it during early voting.
Okay, that makes sense. But if you look at the age distribution on same day registration, it skews younger, as you might expect, people voting for the first time. There was a whole heck of a lot of 40, 50, 60, 70-year-olds that registered for the first time and voted for the first time in this election, which I thought was kind of cool. If you're interested in personal security, your personal information, you should know that this is all public information. I'm not showing anything here that I had any special access to. Your address, your city. I don't think this particular data set includes where you register. I'm sorry, the party you registered as, because it doesn't matter on a per vote basis. But that would be easy enough to pivot on. There's public databases available where you can go and look up what somebody registered as. My only political thing that I'll say is I do not understand why anybody in the state of North Carolina would register with a political party. It serves no practical purpose. You can vote in any primary. You just have to declare that you want to vote in either a Republican or a Democratic primary. You only get to pick one, and you can keep me honest there since you're familiar with this as well. But I'm a registered independent. I've been a registered independent for forever. I don't understand declaring a party.
So the reason for doing that, Tony, is if you want to work with the party, if you want to fundraise for the party, if you're whether you're a Republican or a part of the Democratic Party, if you're working with the party, then they're going to require that you declare as that party.
In my experience, that is not true. I have volunteered as a data scientist for a national election in the past, working within North Carolina, and did not declare. I was registered as an independent.
Okay.
Now, some may require it.
You worked at the national level, not at the state level. And
I worked at the state level.
Okay, I thought you.
Maybe
okay,
things have changed since then, but yeah. Anyway, so this is where it gets
interesting. The fundraising part of it, then that's
it may be the fundraising. Yeah, I don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah, they do require it.
I was working on the data science end. Here's where you get interesting. This is the where the ballot was mailed to. They got addresses. If there was a relative that was involved, they have their address. Election date is useless here because it's all the same date. Oh, here it is. This is the code for the what the voters registered party is. Their precinct, all their districts. This is where we spent most of our time breaking down this data. This is how the ballot was requested as a mail-in ballot. That's their requested party again. This is the date that the request was received. This is the date that the ballot was sent out. This is the date that the ballot was returned. Here's a really important field. This is the return status. And so you got a whole bunch of acceptance here. Let me stick in another value. See if I can remember them. Let me just scroll down to find another one. Oh, here, wrong voter. So there were 735 that were kicked back as wrong voters. Didn't match up. It may be that they sent the wrong ballot in the wrong envelope. I don't know. There's lots of different reasons for this, but we use this return status to help follow how things were going. If they voted in an early site, this is where that showed up. And once you pull all of these together, you start to see that let me find another bad ballot. See if we can find the, follow the timeline on one. So again, when 99% of them are fine, you have to scroll a little bit to find one that isn't. More questions while I look through this. There's what I was looking for.
So I'm curious about, I mean, you obviously love working with data and you come up with some great questions to answer. Why are you not working as a data scientist?
I have technological ADD. There's too many fun things to work with, and it's all data to me. Even in the DevSecOps area, it's all data to me. And the approach that a lot of businesses are taking now is absolutely right. One, that they're really looking at using data to drive their business. I probably could work as a data scientist. I have a computer science degree, and a lot of them are looking for specific statistics and higher math degrees. And honestly, I can earn enough with what I'm doing now that I'm quite happy with that. Okay, so I think I found what I was looking for. Let me get rid of that. Please be more than one. Oh, and I picked the one where this person hasn't voted yet. And that's what I can tell from this data. I was filtering based on their particular voter ID. This tells me that there's one ballot that was sent out to this person. They returned it and it was kicked back. So that's not a good example. Let me find another one. Let's hide a bunch of these. I'm amazed there's still as many people on as there are. This is like watching grass grow. This is why I say I'm amazed that you would want to watch a live stream of data reduction.
You underestimate my capacity for learning absolutely anything.
That's awesome. Yes.
I'm actually in data science right now with Lambda. We started Unit 4, which is NPL or NLP. I'm sorry.
Okay. Which is a component of data science. I will say that one of my criticisms of a lot of the data science curriculums that are out there, it's throwing a lot of concepts at the wall to see what will stick. I mean, honestly, in quote unquote real world data science, it's messing with databases and it's fairly basic math. I mean, you can do some data science with Excel. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is possible. So let's pick another one and see if we can make this one.
It's essentially how like all of the data science used to be done, was in
Yeah.
Cisco. Before we had like pandas and NumPy and SciPy. And stuff.
Right. And AI as a component. Oh, good. We came up with 2. Okay. So here's a good example of how data can tell a story. After this finishes loading. So this person called Nina Christian from Buncombe County. They are Aura. That's an interesting middle name. So that ballot had been originally mailed to them in Asheville, North Carolina. That original ballot was mailed to them on 9/23. I'm sorry, they requested it on 9/23. It was sent to them on 10/8, and they returned it just a couple of days later. It was rejected because the witness information was incomplete. They were notified of that by their local board of elections, either via text or mail, or they might have gotten a phone call. Each board of elections was responsible for that. North Carolina law says that has to happen. They responded by on 10/26, they went to a one-stop in-person early voting site and cast their ballot. That happened to be at Harrah's Cherokee Center in Asheville. Cool. Oh, that's the I want to say that's where they hold concerts and things like that too. But just from this database, we can follow the path that this particular voter took to solve their problem. And this ballot here would have been canceled. It would have been ignored. And this is the accepted ballot. The most that I saw this happen looking through the data set, I wanted to say it took someone 8 tries to do it. And I think that's a story in itself. That's actually something I included in the article, is that people went to great lengths to vote this election, which I thought was pretty cool. So I know your question was, is who they voted for in here? Absolutely not. But once you unwind the data and understand what it's telling you, you can put together some pretty interesting stories.
So just to shift gears here a little bit, Tony, I would like to know, what it's like to work for Cisco.
It's a big company. I've worked for them, like I say, for 20 years, and I've done lots of different things there. And that's one thing that Cisco really encourages people to do, is to try some different things. You're a far more useful employee, and you have a lot broader experience base doing that. I started out supporting ClearCase, if you remember that. It's still around, but it's not quite as popular now that source code repositories like GitHub are so easy to use and can be used in the enterprise as well. I started out supporting that, and I was doing automation. I was automating check-in triggers that would check for some compliance things, some security related, some were actually legal related. The very first script that I wrote was in Perl, and it was checking to ensure that code checked into our repositories had the proper headers, including a copyright notice, because that's what our lawyers said we were supposed to do. So we had a check-in trigger that checked that. I've also done virtualization. Before virtualization was cool, we had a way that engineers could stand up a virtual Apache website. We wrote tools that allowed them to do that themselves. I've done, from there I moved on to a kind of a pure DevOps role, worked within InfoSec in security compliance. I reviewed architectures for security compliance. I did a lot of work with cloud security compliance. That was doing a lot of data science around what are the things that we can do better on our various cloud offering products, WebEx being one of them, but there's a bunch of others in there as well. We had written our own security standards before industry standards had really been created. Then the next thing was to align those internal standards to the industrial standards. And most recently, for about the last year and a half, I've been working on the government side, which is interesting because it's a different environment in terms of compliance and data protection. And we really have to segment our data strongly Even between branches of the military, everything's separated. The Army doesn't see the Air Force, the Navy doesn't see, everybody else's. It's a different world. Any specific podcast or books that you recommend related to science and technology? Let me look that up real quick. I like Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast. It's pretty good. I'm a bit of a history nerd when it comes to space. So there's one called Space Rocket History Podcast. It's pretty good. There's one that's produced by NASA called Houston, We Have a Podcast that I like a lot. We Martians is pretty good. It's specific to topics around Mars. But if you like the math and you like the really in-depth technical discussions, there's one called Orbital Mechanics that I like a lot too. As far as books are concerned, The Martian is a really good book. There's so many of them out there. It's hard to show just one. Let me share just two here. Is my camera still working? Because I've kind of got a freeze on my.
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, so this is the Bible for astronomic calculations. It's by a gentleman called Gene Meas. And when you go and look at any of these modules, these Python modules, I'll stick the name in the chat before we leave here. If you go and look at any of these Python modules I've been talking about, they all reference this. It's written in pseudocode, kind of. It's pseudocode by somebody that probably only knew Fortran. And you can see some Fortran leavings in there, but it is the calculations that are used. It's all the algorithms that are used for all these calendar concerns that we have. In astronomical calculations, we always switch to a Julian calendar where we're just counting days. So it handles all of that, handles rising, setting times, coordinates, the elliptical components of satellites. And over on the information security side, there's tons of different books on the math behind cryptography, but there's a book called The Code Book. And I taught a class at NC State several years ago on the history of cryptography. And this was our textbook. It's written by a man called Simon Singh, who has done some productions for the BBC on this topic. It goes through the history of cryptography, starting back in the medieval times on up to quantum cryptography. Even has some questions and answers in there. It's one of the better treatments of World War II, particularly with the Enigma machine. So that's a really good book if you're interested in cryptography as well. And it's really easy to read. There's no math in it. It's more about the history of things. And let me type those in while I'm thinking about it. Other questions?
So, so again, I'm going to change gears here.
No worries.
A lot of our members are, trying to get into software and development, or data science or DevOps with non-traditional backgrounds. So they may have a degree, but in a completely different area, or they may not have a degree at all.
Right.
And I was just wondering if you were, one, aware of any programs at Cisco for people with non-traditional backgrounds, and two, would you have any advice for young devs that are trying to break in?
So I don't know of any specific programs to specifically try to bring in people with non-traditional backgrounds. you got to set yourself apart from the rest of the pack, however you go about doing that. The very first thing that a lot of the recruiters are going to look at is your degree. I mean, that's just a fact of life. So if you have a degree in history or music and you're working, you're hoping to get a job as a developer, there's going to have to be some explanation. There's going to have to be something that's in your resume that indicates that you can do the job. There's a couple ways you can do that. There are a number of certifications that you can go through that are going to demonstrate your proficiency in these things. And there's so many of them, we can't even go into all of them here. And I'm not an expert in that, so I can't really tell you which ones are good and which ones aren't. I can tell you which ones I have, which ones I feel are valuable in the information security realm of things. But they got to be able to read in your resume that you've worked on stuff related to this. Having a GitHub repo that is publicly available is a really, really good thing. If I see that, I'm going to go look, and I'm going to go look at everything in there. That's where I get to know you as a coder. I get to know how you think. That's even more valuable to me than some of these dumb whiteboard coding interviews. That shows how you think when you're put on the spot, and we try not to put you on the spot all the time. So seeing what kind of produced code looks like, that's useful. So definitely do that. Get involved in coding projects for things that interest you. Some of the things that I've talked about here. Maybe you're involved with your church and they need some help with their database, their member database. Write some code that helps with that. Publish the code so it's clear what you did there. Not everything has to be a paid for experience. Some of the volunteer stuff, we're absolutely going to consider that, especially for an entry level position.
Thanks.
Well, I bored everybody to death. The questions have slowed down some.
No, Tony, this has been great. I'm sure everybody here is, because they're still here.
Yeah.
So obviously.
And I threw a lot at the wall. I apologize for that, but I wanted to give you a broad example of some of the things that we've been working on, particularly at the TV station.
I actually have a question.
Please.
I've actually, I've been working at Eventbrite as a software engineer for about a year. And I'm trying to pivot more into being kind of like a DevOps minded developer. Do you have any tips for that?
I would suggest in your current role, if you're looking to move into DevOps there, you sit back and you think about all the things that slow you down as a developer. And then you talk to your fellow developers and you talk to any product managers, product owners. Think about the things that are slowing you down or that are repetitive or that are prone for mistakes. And you automate those things. Are you using anything like a Jenkins or some other build tool there in your operations?
Yeah, we're using Jenkins right now.
Okay.
HashiCorp suite for a lot of the rest of it.
Okay. Are you doing any testing, automated testing?
Yes. Right now, Jenkins is kind of our CI/CD tool. We're moving towards Circle.
Okay. Yeah, the tools don't matter in the end. With my team at Cisco, when we start talking about problems and solutions and the conversation turns to tools, I turn it away from tools immediately. And let's talk about what the problem is and how we might solve the problem. Introducing another tool doesn't always solve the problem. So you're thinking about it in the right way. Adding more test into your existing CI/CD pipeline is a great way to get more heavily involved in DevOps. Do you have a set of machines that you use over and over again for those tests, or do you stand them up, test on them, and then destroy them?
From what I know, I think we're using the same machines over and over again.
Okay, and are they all on premise, meaning you have a data center there, or are you out in the cloud like AWS or something like that?
In the cloud.
In the cloud.
Yeah.
That's a perfect opportunity for you to get involved in DevOps and save the company some money. I would suspect those test machines are probably idle most of the time. It's part of the maturity process, getting more and more mature as an organization with CI/CD. CI/CD is great, but adding orchestration in there, where when you go to run a test, you have the orchestration code, be it a something like Terraform or any of the AWS specific ways of standing up machines out there. You tie that into your CI/CD pipeline so that it goes out, creates the infrastructure. However, if it's just a single EC2 instance, great. You run it, you stand it up, you run your test on there, you pull your results out of the test, file that away wherever it needs to be filed in a database or an artifactory or something like that, and then you destroy the infrastructure when you're done with it. Then you can start to show cost savings. We're not paying for infrastructure that's sitting out there doing nothing. And when you want to be able to scale your production infrastructure to meet demands, you got a head start there by having that orchestration code that can stand the infrastructure up for you, and you can build that into your operations that way. That make any sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. That's actually, I'm not a full SRE here. Sorry, I live near a lot of hospitals. I'm not a full SRE. I'm what's called an SRE-ITA, which is like a developer who did get some SRE training to kind of help out with the SRE so they can work on some of the bigger projects. So I do know just from my conversations and training that that's something that they did want to move towards is like auto-scaled infrastructure, but they haven't done that yet. But I might.
Building it out for test first is a great way to build up that maturity. Trying to build it out in production is hard.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, just from a career point of view, going to your manager and saying, I see this as an area for growth for us. I see us, if we put more effort into orchestration, this is what I see coming out of it, and I want to step up and do that.
Okay.
They're going to respect that. I don't know what it's like at your company, but titles don't matter. Titles are just get in the way. Stepping up and getting something done is what's important.
Yeah, that's kind of the way we run here. Thank you.
Sounds like you work for a good company then.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work that way.
Thank you.
Of course. More questions, or are we gonna call it a day? I'm happy to answer more.
So do they offer like permanent remote positions, or are they just doing remote for the COVID thing?
Specific to Cisco?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all remote now. We have been remote since February sometime, and that we got a notice from the uppity ups way up the chain. So this is across the entire company that's going to extend well into 2021. And I'll tell you, just between you and me, this is my view of the world. I don't think we're ever going to work the way we did again, not just at Cisco, worldwide. I think working from home is going to be a much larger component of this industry going forward. The managers that have in the past been hesitant to do it have seen that they can make it work. Managers that have been wanting to see their people on a daily basis for whatever reason, they've figured out how to make it work over the last couple of months. We can continue doing that. I just think it's going to be different going forward.
I hope so, because I live in a very rural community, and yeah, as far as tech jobs around here, there isn't much.
How's your internet connections been? I know I work with some of my colleagues live out in the sticks and have had some challenges there.
Actually, we have DSL out here.
Okay.
It's pretty good for the most part. I mean, if we get like a lot of rain or something like that, then
Yeah.
it's in and out. But other
Well,
than that, for the most
I'm
part,
on gigabit Ethernet, and I've had some troubles too, because everybody's home.
well, I don't know if it had something to do with living out here in the sticks, but we're in north central Florida and
Okay.
about halfway between Jacksonville or Tallahassee, whichever way you go.
I've driven through there many times driving down to the Cape.
Okay, I think we've come to the end of our programming day here, Tony.
Cool.
I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. Just a note to everybody, if you want to be included in the prize draw for 1-year license to any of JetBrains IDEs,
Ooh, that's a good prize.
Yeah, whatever you choose. They're a sponsor for us, and so they allow us to give away a 1-year license for each of our monthly meetings. But again, thank you, Tony. I really enjoyed this. I know everyone else did. I'm going to be stalking your repo and looking not only at the code that you've produced previously, but also like what's coming down the pike. I'm really, really interested to see what you do. And if you ever decide, I mean, because as young devs, as students, something that we don't get a chance to see is people refactoring their code. We're told, oh, you need to refactor your code, but it's not actually something that we have experience with or that we've experienced. So I literally would pay. I will pay you if you want to do a stream and like refactor your code in my presence.
I tell you what, next time I've got an interesting, easy enough to understand problem that has come our way at the TV station that I'm writing code for, we'll do a from scratch live coding where there's tons of refactoring going on.
Oh, that would be so awesome.
That's, it'd probably be a good solid hour of staring at the screen, but sure, if people are interested in that, we'll do that. I'll keep that in mind and let you know next time that opportunity arises.
Thank you.
Let me share one thing on JetBrains. If you win that, I know that and this is again just my advice, take it or leave it. I know that the tendency would for people on this call would be to go directly to PyCharm as the thing that you get the license for. Look at their other tools that are available too. I have a corporate license for them, so I have all of them available to me. WebStorm and DataGrip and the others. Look at the others and see if those are interesting to you or not. And then go ahead and download the community edition of PyCharm. And I say that because if I lost my license to PyCharm tomorrow, I would switch to the community edition, and I probably wouldn't really notice it. There are some nice data science features in the professional edition of PyCharm. And when you're working with maps out of Matplotlib, it'll throw up a versioned, you can go back and see previous maps that you've created as you're refactoring your code. That's kind of cool, but I could live without it. So look at the other things and see if there's DataGrip in particular is really nice for connecting to remote databases if you do that at all. Just
Thank
one minute.
That's great advice. Okay, I'm going to end the recording now.